Before we get into these questions, I want to review what vertex form actually is. So if we take a look at these two parabolas here, the vertices will be the change in direction on the parabola. So as we're decreasing here, all of a sudden we start to increase. That's where that vertex point is. You can see the other one right here. Now, a vertex form is an equation. It's going to start with y equals, and then we have a quantity square. But in this quantity, we're subtracting h, and h is the x value of our vertex down here. And then after we square this quantity, we're going to be adding in our k value that goes in at the end. K represents the y coordinate of our vertex point. Now, what happens, or well, how can we tell if our parabola is opening up like this, or if it's opening downwards like this? Well, there's another value that goes in front, and that's going to be a. So if that a is positive, we open upwards, and if it's negative, it's going to open up downwards. Now, one other thing to point out is that our a value here cannot equal 0, because if we have a equals 0, then we'd be multiplying this part by 0, and that would give us 0, and it knocks out the whole quadratic part of this equation to begin with. So now, besides parabolas opening up and down, you could also have some parabolas that open up to the right and open up to the left, but they still revolve around the vertex. So we point out our vertexes here, or I should say our vertices. Vertices is the plural version of vertex point. And we're going to start plugging these into the equation. Now, the difference with this equation is that it starts with x equals, and then in parentheses we have our y. And now instead of our h value going in parentheses, it's going to go out here, so we add h, or our x coordinate of our vertex point. And then we're going to be subtracting our k value, and that goes inside the parentheses. So again, we're going to bring in our a. Okay, so if our a is positive, that changes the direction of which our parabola opens up. In this case, it's going to be opening up to our right. And if it's negative, it's going to be opening up to our left. And just like this one over here, a cannot equal 0. Now let's get into the questions. And we're asked to come up with vertex form for both of these parabolas. And the first thing we're going to do is call out the vertex point. And in this parabola, our vertex point happens right here. The x value, if we follow it down to the x-axis, looks like it's going to be 2. And our y value, following it to our y-axis, is going to be 3. So our point is going to be 2, 3. Now we have to come up with the equation for vertex form. So I'm going to start off by writing y equals, and now I leave some things blank. As you can see, I didn't plug in the h value or the k value. I like to do that afterwards. Now, we know that we have to subtract the h value here, right? So when we see our x, we go subtract, and then our h value, which is going to be 2. And on the outside here, we need to add in our k value, so we're going to add in 3. And that's going to be the vertex form for this parabola. Let's move on to our second parabola. First thing we're going to do is call out our vertex again, and that's going to happen right here. And our x value, if we move down to the x-axis, it looks like it's going to be -4. And our y value, we look to our y-axis, and it's going to be 2. So our vertex, we could say, is going to be -4, 2. Once again, I'm going to start out by writing our vertex form, and I'm going to leave some things blank. And we need to plug in our h and our k values. Now we need to subtract a -4. So whenever we subtract a negative number like this, we could say that it's the same thing as adding a number, right? So what we actually do is add in a 4. And then with our k value, we need to add in our k, and that's going to be just a +2. Now, a trick to these vertex form problems is if you look at our vertex, you always go with the opposite sign for h and then our real sign for k. So here, it looks like we have a -2, but really it's a +2. And then, a 3 is a 3. But here, our h value is -4, so we write the opposite sign. Here we're adding 4, and then our k is the same sign. So that's that. In this question, we're given a couple quadratic equations. They're in vertex form, and we just need to come up with a rough sketch of the graph. So the first thing we're going to do is write down the vertex form formula. And the second thing is I'm going to call out my vertex. Now, my vertex, remember, is h comma k, and our h value is what we're subtracting from our x. So what number are we subtracting from our x? And that's going to be 3. So our h is going to be 3, and then what number are we adding on the outside? That's 4. So our vertex here is going to be 3 comma 4. And if we graph this on the coordinate system, I'm going to come up with my own tick marks here. So my x value is going to be 3, so I go 1, 2, 3, and then we got to go up 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to put in my vertex point right about there. And now if you look at the front of the equation here, we have a positive 1. Well, it's going to be like an invisible 1, and that means our parabola is going to go upwards. Well, it opens upwards, right? And this is a rough sketch, so we don't have to be perfect as far as how quickly our parabola is increasing or not. All right, so that's that. Let's move on to this one. And we want to figure out what our h and k values are. Now, remember that our h value is what we're subtracting from our x. Or we could think of it as like the opposite sign. So we have plus 2 here. So then our h value is going to be a negative 2. And then what are we adding on the outside? Well, we're actually subtracting 1. So we go opposite sign, and that's going to be a negative 1. So our vertex is negative 2 comma negative 1. And I'm going to put this on my graph, so we have to go to the left twice and then down 1 to plot our vertex point. And what is different about this one compared to this one is that the number in front here is a negative 1. All right, so that means that our parabola is going to be opening up downwards. So I have to send this down like that. And that's going to be the parabola, a really very rough sketch of this quadratic equation.